Now listen closely, because what I'm about to share with you is not about labels, not about psychology alone, and certainly not about blaming anyone. This is about human behavior, human survival, and the invisible rules we live by when fear runs the show. There is a kind of obsession that makes no noise, no messages sent, no words spoken, no feelings admitted, and yet it lives loudly inside the mind. It wakes someone up at night. It replays conversations that never happened. It imagines futures that are never acted on. This is the quiet obsession an avoidant refuses to show. Understand this: avoidance is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of suppression. It is not that they don't care. It's that caring once felt dangerous. At some point in life, connection became associated with pain. Vulnerability became associated with loss. And so the nervous system learned a rule: stay in control, stay distant, stay safe. That rule worked once. It protected them once. But what protects you in survival can imprison you in adulthood. Here's the paradox. The very thing they push away externally becomes the thing they obsess over internally. The mind clings where the body retreats. The heart longs while the mouth stays silent. And the stronger the connection feels, the tighter the grip on emotional control becomes. Why? Because attachment threatens identity. Love threatens autonomy. And for someone who learned early that closeness equals danger, obsession is safer than expression. Thinking is safer than feeling. Distance is safer than honesty. But let me tell you something profound. What you resist doesn't disappear. It intensifies. You can distract yourself. You can stay busy. You can convince the world you're unbothered. But inside, the nervous system doesn't lie. The body remembers. The heart keeps score, and the soul knows when it is denying its own truth. This quiet obsession is not weakness. It is unexpressed power. It is life force with nowhere to go. The real pain isn't loving someone. The real pain is denying yourself the courage to feel alive. And here's where transformation begins. You see, obsession fades when safety is created. Not external safety, internal safety. When someone realizes, I can feel and survive. I can open and still be whole. I can love without losing myself. Avoidants don't need pressure. They don't need chasing. They need a new reference experience. A moment where vulnerability does not lead to abandonment. A moment where truth does not lead to punishment. A moment where love does not require self-erasure. Because the ultimate fear is not intimacy. The ultimate fear is dependence, and dependence feels like death to a nervous system trained for self-reliance. But here's the truth that changes everything. Connection does not destroy autonomy. Unconscious patterns do. When you choose awareness, you reclaim power. When you face discomfort voluntarily, you rewrite destiny. When you stop running from emotion and start mastering it, obsession transforms into clarity. And clarity leads to freedom. Freedom is not the absence of attachment. Freedom is the ability to choose connection without fear. The quiet obsession ends the moment someone decides to stop protecting an old wound and start honoring their present truth. The moment they choose growth over control, courage over comfort, love over armor. Because the greatest loss is not being hurt. The greatest loss is living a life where the deepest feelings never get the chance to breathe. And when someone finally understands that, the silence breaks, not with chaos, but with strength. Avoidants often feel deeply, but what makes them appear distant is not a lack of emotion. It is the disciplined suppression of it. Beneath the calm exterior, there is intensity, sensitivity, longing, and attachment operating at full volume. The difference is not in the depth of feeling, but in the strategy used to manage it. For the avoidant, emotional expression once felt unsafe, overwhelming, or costly, so control became the substitute for connection. Early in life, many avoidants learned, consciously or unconsciously, that showing need led to disappointment, rejection, criticism, or emotional chaos. When vulnerability was met with inconsistency or emotional unavailability, the nervous system adapted. It learned that survival depended on self-containment, feel less, need less, show nothing. This adaptation was not a flaw. It was intelligence under pressure. It allowed the individual to function, to stay composed, to avoid the pain of unmet emotional needs. But here's the crucial truth. Suppression does not eliminate emotion. It redirects it inward. Avoidants often experience emotions with great depth, but instead of flowing outward through communication, affection, or vulnerability, those emotions are processed internally, through thinking, analyzing, imagining, and replaying. The heart speaks, but the mind intercepts. Feelings are translated into thoughts rather than expressions. This creates an inner world that is rich, complex, and emotionally charged, while the outer world appears calm, detached, or indifferent. Control becomes the currency of safety. By limiting expression, the avoidant maintains emotional sovereignty. If nothing is revealed, nothing can be taken. If no nay sees the depth, no one can wound it. This is why avoidants often appear strongest when they are actually protecting something extremely tender. Emotional restraint is not coldness, it is guardianship. What many people misunderstand is that avoidants are not disconnected from their emotions. They are hyper-aware of them. They notice every internal shift, every attachment signal, every surge of longing. But awareness without expression creates pressure. Over time, the suppressed feelings don't disappear, they intensify. The more something matters, the more tightly it is held in, the deeper the attachment, the greater the silence. This is where the paradox emerges. The avoidant may seem distant, yet internally they can be deeply bonded. They may not reach out, yet they think often. They may not speak love, yet they feel it intensely. Their refusal to show emotion is not a reflection of its absence, but of its perceived danger. Expression feels like exposure, and exposure feels like loss of control. There is also a profound fear beneath the suppression, the fear of being overwhelmed by one's own feelings. For an avoidant, emotions can feel consuming, as though once released, they might flood everything. Suppression becomes a way to regulate intensity. It's not about denial, it's about containment. If I open the door even a little, will I be able to close it again? This fear keeps the door shut. Over time, this pattern creates a split. The inner self feels deeply and longs for connection, while the outer self prioritizes independence and emotional self-sufficiency. The avoidant learns to rely on themselves emotionally, even while craving closeness. This inner conflict is exhausting yet familiar. Familiarity often feels safer than change. The tragedy is not that avoidants don't feel. The tragedy is that they learned feeling had to be hidden to survive. And until safety replaces control, they will continue to love quietly, care privately, and suppress publicly, believing that showing less is the only way to lose less, even as the heart continues to carry more. Detachment is often mistaken for indifference, but in reality it is a carefully learned survival strategy. What looks like emotional distance is rarely a lack of care. It is the result of conditioning that taught the nervous system to associate closeness with danger. When someone becomes emotionally detached, they are not turning off their feelings, they are managing perceived risk. Detachment is not about not wanting connection, it is about fearing what connection might cost. At its core, detachment develops when early emotional experiences are inconsistent, intrusive, overwhelming, or unreliable. When love feels conditional or unpredictable, the mind adapts by pulling back. If closeness brings disappointment, if dependence leads to abandonment, or if vulnerability is met with shame, the system learns a rule: stay self-contained. This rule becomes automatic. Over time, emotional withdrawal becomes less of a conscious choice and more of a reflex. What many fail to understand is that detachment requires constant effort. Indifference is effortless. Detachment is active. It involves monitoring emotions, downregulating desire, rationalizing distance, and keeping attachment signals under control. There is vigilance beneath the calm. The avoidant watches themselves closely, ensuring that feelings don't grow large enough to demand expression. This self-monitoring is exhausting, but it feels safer than emotional exposure. Detachment also preserves a sense of autonomy. For someone who learned that closeness meant losing themselves, having their needs ignored, their boundaries crossed, or their emotions dismissed, distance becomes a way to maintain identity. Emotional self-reliance feels empowering when dependence once felt humiliating or dangerous. Independence becomes not just a preference but a shield against vulnerability. Yet beneath this shield lies a contradiction. The same person who pulls away can still feel attachment deeply. Detachment doesn't erase longing, it postpones it. It doesn't eliminate need, it buries it. And buried needs don't vanish. They surface indirectly through overthinking, private fantasy, sudden withdrawal, or unexplained emotional fatigue. The body carries what the behavior denies. Another misunderstood aspect of detachment is its connection to fear of emotional responsibility. Closeness implies obligation, to show up, to respond, to be affected. For someone whose early environment taught them that emotional responsibility was overwhelming or unsafe, detachment reduces that pressure. Distance creates the illusion of control. Control over time, over emotional demands, over potential disappointment. The avoidant is not rejecting the other person. They are protecting themselves from the weight of emotional engagement. This is why detachment often intensifies when connection becomes real, when feelings are mutual, when intimacy deepens, when the possibility of loss increases. The nervous system sounds an alarm. The strategy activates, pull back, minimize, rationalize. What looks like sudden disinterest is actually heightened attachment paired with heightened fear. The more it matters, the more dangerous it feels. Detachment is also reinforced by internal narratives. Avoidants often tell themselves they are better alone, not emotional, or independent by nature. These stories provide coherence and justify distance. They protect self-esteem and prevent the painful acknowledgement of unmet emotional needs. Admitting desire would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability once had consequences. The tragedy is that detachment can create the very loneliness it was meant to prevent. By avoiding emotional risk, the avoidant avoids emotional reward as well. Connection remains just out of reach, not because it isn't wanted, but because safety has been defined too narrowly. Safety becomes the absence of emotional exposure rather than the presence of emotional support. Detachment is not a failure to love. It is a fear-based adaptation to loving in an unsafe world. Until the nervous system learns that closeness no longer equals danger, detachment will continue to masquerade as indifference, quietly protecting the heart while simultaneously keeping it alone. The quiet obsession that lives beneath avoidance is not born from a lack of desire, but from unresolved attachment wounds that were never given language, safety, or repair. When emotional needs go unmet early in life, the body remembers the absence even when the mind learns to dismiss it. These unresolved wounds don't disappear with time. They go dormant, waiting for a connection that feels familiar enough to activate them again. Attachment wounds form when closeness is paired with pain, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability. A child may learn that love is unpredictable, that expressing need brings disappointment, or that depending on others leads to loss. To survive, the psyche adapts by minimizing outward attachment while still carrying the longing inward. This creates a split. The need for connection remains, but the permission to express it does not. When an avoidant later encounters someone who triggers emotional resonance, someone who feels safe, intriguing, or emotionally significant, the attachment system activates. But because the original wounds were never healed, the activation feels threatening rather than comforting. Desire awakens alongside fear. Longing emerges alongside self-protection. The result is internal fixation without external movement. Obsession grows quietly because action feels too risky. This obsession is not romantic fantasy alone, it is unfinished emotional business. The nervous system recognizes something unresolved and seeks completion. Thoughts loop because feelings were never allowed full expression. The mind returns again and again to the same person or scenario, attempting to process what the heart cannot openly engage. This is why the obsession feels involuntary. It is the psyche trying to resolve an old pattern in a new context. Avoidants often mistake this internal fixation for weakness or loss of control, which deepens the suppression. They may judge themselves for caring, then retreat further into emotional restraint. But the obsession persists because desire has nowhere to go. When expression is blocked, energy turns inward. What cannot be lived is imagined. What cannot be spoken is rehearsed silently. What cannot be risked becomes ruminated. Unresolved attachment wounds also distort perception. The avoidant may idealize the person of interest, not because the person is perfect, but because they represent a chance at repair. The psyche projects hope onto them, the hope of being seen without being consumed, loved without being trapped. This projection fuels obsession, yet fear prevents pursuit. The wound wants healing, but the strategy insists on distance. Another layer of obsession comes from emotional deprivation. When someone has learned to self-soothe excessively, even small moments of connection can feel amplified. A glance, a conversation, or a shared understanding can carry enormous emotional weight. Because such moments are rare, they are replayed repeatedly. The scarcity of emotional nourishment makes each drop feel significant, almost sacred. The obsession is less about the person and more about what they awaken. The tragedy is that avoidance prevents the very experiences that could heal the wound. Repair requires exposure, consistency, and emotional risk, precisely what the avoidant learned to avoid. So the attachment system remains stuck in anticipation rather than fulfillment. The obsession lives in potential rather than reality. It is safer to long from afar than to risk disappointment up close. This unresolved state keeps the nervous system in tension. The heart leans forward while the body pulls back. Desire says move closer. Fear says stay protected. The result is paralysis masked as independence. The avoidant may appear calm, rational, or detached, while internally experiencing persistent preoccupation. The quiet obsession is not proof of emotional immaturity. It is evidence of unhealed attachment pain seeking resolution. Until those wounds are acknowledged and given new emotional experiences, desire will continue to circle inward, repeating itself in thought rather than unfolding in life. Avoidants crave connection just as deeply as anyone else, but their longing is complicated by an equally powerful fear of dependence, loss of autonomy, and emotional exposure. This inner conflict is not a contradiction of desire. It is the collision between two survival needs that learn to compete rather than cooperate. On one side is the human need for closeness, bonding, and shared emotional experience. On the other is the learned belief that needing someone is dangerous for many avoidants. Dependence once meant vulnerability without protection. It meant relying on someone who was inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, controlling, or overwhelming. As a result, autonomy became synonymous with safety. Independence was not just a value, it was a defense. The ability to self-regulate, self-soothe, and self-contain became proof of strength. Over time, the nervous system learned that needing less meant hurting less. Yet the need for connection never disappears. It waits quietly beneath the surface, emerging in moments of emotional resonance. When an avoidant meets someone who feels attuned, present, or emotionally meaningful, desire activates naturally. The body leans in, the heart opens, but almost immediately fear follows. If I need this, will I lose myself? If I attach, will I be trapped? These questions are not conscious. They are somatic memories encoded in the nervous system. Emotional exposure is particularly threatening because it involves being seen. To be seen means to be known. And to be known means the possibility of rejection, disappointment, or control. Avoidants often equate emotional openness with surrendering power. They may fear that once they reveal their inner world, they will be judged, misunderstood, or expected to give more than they can sustain. Silence feels safer than misinterpretation. This fear creates a push-pull dynamic. The avoidant may move closer emotionally, then suddenly pull away. They may crave intimacy, then feel suffocated by it. This is not manipulation, it is dysregulation. The nervous system oscillates between longing and self-protection, unable to settle. Connection feels nourishing and threatening at the same time. Loss of autonomy is another core fear. Many avoidants grew up in environments where boundaries were not respected or where emotional closeness came with pressure and obligation. Intimacy then becomes associated with being engulfed or controlled. Even healthy interdependence can feel intrusive to someone whose early autonomy was compromised. As a result, avoidants may limit closeness not because they don't care, but because they fear disappearing within the relationship. Dependence also triggers shame. Society often equates strength with self-sufficiency, and avoidants internalize this deeply. Needing someone can feel like failure, weakness, or regression. Rather than risk that shame, they suppress need altogether. They may convince themselves they are better alone, while quietly longing for connection they believe shouldn't want. What makes this especially painful is that avoidants often long for a very specific kind of connection, one that allows closeness without loss of self. They desire intimacy that feels spacious, not consuming. But because they fear asking for this, they settle for distance instead. They protect autonomy at the cost of connection, believing it is the safer trade-off. Emotional exposure also requires trust in one's ability to cope with outcomes. For an avoidant, opening up raises the question, if this goes wrong, can I survive it? Past experiences may have taught them that emotional pain is overwhelming. Until they learn that they can feel deeply and remain intact, avoidance remains the default. The tragedy is not that avoidants don't want closeness. The tragedy is that they learned closeness came with conditions that felt unbearable. So they stand at the edge of intimacy, reaching for connection with one hand while holding tightly to autonomy with the other, longing for both, yet fearing the costs of choosing either. Silence for the avoidant is not emptiness, it is armor. It becomes the primary shield against emotional risk, a way to maintain control in situations where expression feels dangerous. When words are withheld, vulnerability is delayed. When feelings are unspoken, exposure is avoided. Silence creates the illusion of safety, yet within that silence, the mind becomes increasingly loud. Avoidants often believe that by not speaking, they are preventing pain for themselves and for others. They may tell themselves that expressing emotion would complicate things, create expectations, or lead to disappointment. Silence feels like the most responsible choice, the least disruptive option. But what is suppressed externally does not remain neutral internally. It transforms. The unspoken begins to echo. Conversations replay repeatedly in the mind. What could have been said, what should have been said, what might be said someday. The avoidant imagines different outcomes, rehearses responses, rewrites endings. This mental activity is not random. It is the psyche's attempt to process emotions that were never allowed to move through the body and into relationship. The mind becomes the only place where expression is permitted. This inner replay intensifies attachment. Every unexpressed feeling gains weight because it remains unresolved. Silence freezes the moment, trapping the emotional charge inside it. Without closure, the nervous system stays activated. The avoidant may appear calm on the surface, but internally they are revisiting the same emotional territory again and again, unable to discharge it through action or communication. There is also a sense of power in silence. By not revealing their inner world, the avoidant retains control over the narrative. No one can reject what they don't know. No one can criticize what isn't shared. Silence becomes a way to stay protected from judgment and disappointment. Yet this control comes at a cost: isolation. The very shield that prevents pain also prevents connection. The mind, deprived of real-time emotional exchange, compensates by constructing internal scenarios. The avoidant may fantasize about closeness while maintaining distance in reality. They may feel deeply bonded internally while remaining externally detached. This split creates confusion not only for others but for the avoidant themselves. They feel invested yet inactive, connected yet alone. Silence also amplifies meaning. Small interactions become significant because they are all the avoidant allows themselves. A look, a tone, a brief message can carry immense emotional weight. These fragments are analyzed repeatedly, searched for meaning, and stored carefully. The lack of open communication makes every detail feel consequential, feeding the quiet obsession. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. The avoidant learns that thinking feels safer than doing, imagining safer than risking. The mind becomes the arena where attachment lives, but the body remains unfulfilled. There is no resolution, no feedback loop, no reassurance, just endless mental movement without emotional release. What makes this particularly painful is that silence is often mistaken for peace. The avoidant may appear unbothered, composed, or detached, even while internally experiencing emotional turbulence. This disconnect makes it harder to seek support, because the struggle is invisible. The silence that once protected now reasons. There is also grief in silence, the grief of never being fully known. When feelings are consistently withheld, parts of the self remain unseen and unvalidated. The avoidant may long to be understood without having to explain, but understanding requires revelation. Silence delays that possibility indefinitely. The mind cannot resolve what the heart refuses to speak. Without expression, emotions stagnate. They don't dissipate, they accumulate. And the longer the silence persists, the louder the internal dialogue becomes. Thoughts loop not because the avoidant is obsessed by choice, but because silence has removed every other path for emotional processing. Silence may shield the avoidant from immediate pain, but it also ensures that longing has no exit. The heart waits, the mind circles, and the quiet obsession grows, fed not by action, but by everything that remains unsaid. Emotional restraint does not eliminate intensity, it concentrates it. When feelings are consistently held back, denied expression, or filtered through control, they do not fade, they compress. This compression creates inner tension, a psychological and physiological pressure that builds quietly over time, For the avoidant, restraint feels like regulation, but beneath the surface it often amplifies the very emotions they're trying to manage. Avoidants learn early that emotional expression can lead to overwhelm, rejection, or loss of control. In response, they develop strategies to keep feelings contained. D. They stay composed, rational, and self-sufficient. This restraint allows them to function effectively and avoid immediate discomfort. But emotions are not static. They are energy meant to move. When that movement is blocked, the energy turns inward. This inward turn intensifies experience. A feeling that might have passed through expression becomes something that lingers. A moment of connection that could have been clarified becomes something that is analyzed endlessly. The avoidant's inner world grows charged, even as the outer world remains controlled. This is why emotional restraint often coexists with private obsession. The tension has nowhere else to go. The body plays a crucial role here. Even when emotions are suppressed cognitively, the nervous system still registers them. Unexpressed longing can show up as restlessness, fatigue, irritability, or numbness. The avoidant may not consciously identify what they are feeling, but their body carries the load. This somatic tension keeps the attachment system activated beneath conscious awareness. Private obsession becomes a pressure valve. Thoughts, fantasies, and mental rehearsals allow some release without risking exposure. The avoidant may replay interactions, imagine alternative outcomes, or fixate on emotional possibilities. These internal processes provide a sense of connection without the vulnerability of real engagement. Obsession becomes a compromise between desire and fear. What intensifies this dynamic is the illusion of control. By keeping feelings private, the avoidant believes they are managing them effectively. But restraint requires constant effort. Monitoring emotional responses, suppressing impulses to reach out, and maintaining distance consumes mental energy. The more effort required, the more significant the underlying emotion usually is. Obsession grows in proportion to the restraint applied. There's also a reinforcement loop at work. Emotional restraint prevents resolution. Without expression, there's no feedback, no reassurance, no correction of assumptions. The mind fills in the gaps, often magnifying meaning and uncertainty. The avoidant may overinterpret small signals or attach excessive significance to limited interactions. The lack of clarity fuels further rumination. This inner intensity can feel confusing and shameful. Avoidants often see themselves as not emotional. So when they experience strong internal fixation, it conflicts with their self-image. Rather than questioning the strategy, they may double down on restraint. They suppress more, hoping the feelings will eventually dissipate. Instead, the obsession deepens. Private obsession also thrives in isolation. Because the avoidant rarely shares their inner experience, there is no external reality check. Thoughts remain unchallenged. Fantasies remain untested. The inner narrative grows more compelling than actual interaction. The emotional tension becomes familiar, even if uncomfortable. Familiarity can feel safer than uncertainty. Over time, this pattern can create emotional burnout. The constant internal processing without relief drains energy and reduces emotional flexibility. The avoidant may feel stuck, unable to move toward connection, yet unable to let go. The restraint that once provided safety now sustains distress. The key misunderstanding is believing that restraint equals mastery. True emotional mastery involves allowing feelings to move, be expressed, and be integrated. Restraint without release is not balance, it is accumulation. And accumulation inevitably seeks an outlet. For the avoidant, that outlet often becomes quiet obsession, intense, private, and unseen, born not from excess emotion, but from emotion that was never allowed to breathe. Healing begins not with forcing vulnerability, but with replacing the need for control with a sense of internal safety. For the avoidant, control has long been the primary mechanism for emotional regulation. By staying self-contained, predictable, and emotionally reserved, they reduce the risk of being hurt. Control becomes synonymous with survival. But true healing does not come from tighter control. It comes from learning that safety can exist even when control is softened. Safety is not the absence of discomfort. It is the presence of trust. Trust in oneself to feel and survive, trust in others to respond without harm, and trust in reality to be tolerable even when outcomes are uncertain. Avoidants often lack this internal sense of safety because their early experiences taught them that emotions were dangerous or overwhelming. As a result, control felt like the only reliable anchor. When safety is missing, the nervous system stays vigilant. It scans for threats, anticipates loss, and prepares to withdraw. This vigilance keeps the avoidant in a defensive posture, even in situations that do not objectively require it. Healing begins when the nervous system learns new information, that closeness does not automatically lead to pain, and that vulnerability does not equal collapse. This learning does not happen through logic alone. Avoidants often understand intellectually that not all relationships are harmful, yet their bodies react as if danger is imminent. Safety must be experienced, not argued. It is built gradually through small, consistent moments of emotional attunement, moments where expression does no lead to punishment, where boundaries are respected, and where connection feels regulated rather than overwhelming. Replacing control with safety means tolerating uncertainty. Control thrives on predictability. Safety allows for flexibility. For the avoidant, this requires learning to stay present with discomfort instead of immediately retreating. It means noticing the urge to withdraw and choosing curiosity over avoidance. This choice is not about forcing openness, but about allowing emotion to exist without immediate suppression. Internal safety also involves self-compassion. Avoidants often judge themselves harshly for having needs or emotions. They may view dependency as weakness and emotional expression as failure. Healing requires reframing these beliefs. Needing connection is not a flaw, it is a biological reality. Emotions are not threats, they are signals. When the avoidant learns to respond to their inner experience with kindness rather than control, safety begins to grow. Another critical element of safety is boundary clarity. Many avoidants fear vulnerability because they associate it with boundary violation. Learning that boundaries can coexist with closeness is transformative. Safety increases when someone realizes they can say no, slow down, or step back without losing connection. This knowledge reduces the need for extreme emotional distancing. As safety increases, control naturally loosens. The avoidant no longer needs to monitor every feeling or anticipate every outcome. Emotional energy that was once spent on suppression becomes available for presence and choice. The nervous system shifts from defense to engagement. Obsession begins to fade because the internal tension driving it diminishes. Healing also involves allowing others to show up differently than expected. When avoidants experience consistency, reliability, and respect, their internal models of relationships begin to update. Each safe interaction challenges the old belief that closeness is inherently dangerous. Over time, safety becomes the new reference point, replacing control as the primary regulator. This process is gradual and nonlinear. There will be moments of retreat and moments of openness. Healing does not require perfection. It requires persistence. Each time the avoidant chooses safety over control, even in small ways, they reinforce a new pattern. When safety becomes internalized, emotional expression no longer feels like a threat. Connection no longer feels like a loss of self. And the quiet obsession, once fueled by fear and restraint, begins to dissolve, not because desire disappears, but because it no longer needs to hide. True transformation does not occur through insight alone. It requires conscious choice. For the avoidant, patterns of withdrawal, emotional restraint, and self-protection have operated automatically for years. These patterns were formed in moments when there were few alternatives. But what was once unconscious survival must eventually become conscious behavior if growth is to occur. Transformation begins the moment an avoidant recognizes that discomfort is not a signal to retreat, but an invitation to choose differently. Avoidance thrives on autopilot. The nervous system reacts before the mind can intervene. A feeling arises and distance follows. A connection deepens and withdrawal activates. These responses feel inevitable because they are familiar. Conscious choice interrupts this cycle. It creates a pause between impulse and action. In that pause lies freedom. Facing discomfort is not about forcing emotional exposure. It is about staying present when the urge to escape arises. Discomfort often signals growth at the edge of an old pattern. For the avoidant, discomfort might show up as anxiety, restlessness, or the impulse to shut down. Rather than interpreting these sensations as danger, transformation requires reinterpreting them as activation, energy moving through the system. Rewriting emotional patterns involves repetition. One brave choice does not undo years of conditioning. Each time the avoidant chooses to express a feeling, tolerate closeness, or remain engaged instead of withdrawing. They provide the nervous system with new data. Over time, these experiences accumulate, weakening the old associations between vulnerability and threat. Choice also involves responsibility. Avoidants often believe their withdrawal protects both themselves and others. But conscious growth requires acknowledging the impact of avoidance on relationships. This is not about blame, it is about ownership. When someone takes responsibility for their emotional behavior, they reclaim agency. They move from reacting to participating. Transformation also requires clarity about values. Avoidants must ask themselves what kind of life and relationships they truly want. Comfort and control offer safety, but they often limit depth and fulfillment. Choosing growth means prioritizing meaning over immediate relief. It means accepting short-term discomfort in service of long-term connection. Another crucial aspect of rewriting patterns is self-regulation. Avoidants must learn that they can experience emotional intensity without being overwhelmed. This involves developing skills to ground, soothe, and stay present. When the body feels supported, the mind becomes less reactive. Discomfort becomes manageable rather than threatening. Conscious choice also includes communicating needs and limits. Growth does not mean abandoning boundaries. It means expressing them instead of disappearing. When avoidants learn to say, "I need time," "I'm feeling overwhelmed," or "I want closeness but at a slower pace," they replace avoidance with honesty. This builds trust and reduces internal pressure. There is also grief in transformation. Letting go of old patterns means acknowledging what they cost: missed connections, unspoken feelings, unrealized intimacy. Avoidants must allow themselves to feel this loss without retreating into numbness. Grief is not regression, it is integration. Rewriting emotional patterns requires patience. The nervous system does not change overnight. There will be setbacks and moments of retreat. Transformation is not linear, and progress is not measured by perfection. It is measured by awareness and willingness. Ultimately, conscious choice restores dignity. The avoidant no longer lives at the mercy of reflexive withdrawal. They become an active participant in their emotional life. By choosing to face discomfort rather than flee it, they reclaim access to connection, authenticity, and depth. Transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to the part of the self that learned to hide in order to survive, and teaching it that survival is no longer the goal. Living fully is. Thank you for your time, your presence, and your openness to deeper understanding. Goodbye for now. May clarity guide you and courage walk with you forward.